And wow, it's a wild ride. Revolutions, wars, communism, the whole shebang.
Definitely a lot to unpack.
Our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to unearth the key figures and events that made China what it is today, that global superpower.
It's going to be quite a journey. We'll cover a century of massive changes from the final years of imperial China all the way to the People's Republic.
So we start with a China in turmoil. You've got internal struggles like famines and a booming population putting huge pressure on the aging Manchu dynasty.
Right.
And then you've got external forces, these relentless foreign powers carving up their territory. Talk about tension, right?
Absolutely. And this resentment just simmers below the surface.
Yeah.
You can see it perfectly captured in that "no dogs or Chinese" sign.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's completely factual or a kind of a potent myth, it really captures the humiliation a lot of Chinese felt at the hands of these foreign powers.
Yeah, it's a powerful image, that's for sure.
It is.
And it's not just a sign, right? You've got the Opium Wars, the Taiping Rebellion, the Boxer Rising. It feels like every event just chipped away at China's position on the world stage and just fueled this anti-foreign sentiment.
Yeah, definitely.
So how did these events lead to, set the stage for the revolution?
Well, each conflict further weakened the ruling Qing dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
It highlighted how they couldn't protect their own people.
Yeah.
And it created this perfect storm for the 1911 revolution, which ultimately toppled the last emperor.
Okay, so 1911 rolls around, the emperor's gone, they declare a republic. Sounds like a fresh start, but I'm guessing it wasn't that simple.
You're right, it wasn't. While the revolution ended dynastic rule, it also launched China into this period of instability, what we call the warlord era.
Okay.
From 1916 to 1928, different warlords, basically powerful regional military leaders, they divided up China and each fought for control.
So more like jumping from the frying pan into the fire.
Yeah, pretty much.
So how does all this chaos lead to the rise of the Chinese Communist Party?
It's fascinating, really. The warlord era created this void,
Okay.
and people really craved stability and unity. This chaos became fertile ground for new political movements, including the Kuomintang, the KMT, and of course the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP.
Uh-huh. So enter the CCP and a young Mao Zedong.
Right.
This is where the key players start coming in.
Exactly. On the KMT side, you've got Sun Yat-sen, this revolutionary figure who advocated for the three principles: nationalism, democracy, and people's livelihood.
And these ideas, they resonated, right? They must have resonated with a lot of Chinese people who wanted a strong, independent China.
They did. They wanted to be free of foreign influence and internal conflict.
Right. So did Sun Yat-sen's three principles, did they have, a lasting impact?
Oh, definitely. They became core to the KMT's ideology. But putting those principles into practice, well, that was full of challenges and internal divisions.
I can imagine. What about the CCP? How were they gaining traction?
Well, they had a different approach, appealing directly to the peasants who felt ignored by the KMT.
Okay, so two major forces battling for control.
Exactly.
I can't imagine their relationship was all sunshine and roses.
Not exactly. They did initially form a united front.
Okay.
During the Northern Expedition, this military campaign to unify China and get rid of the warlords.
Okay.
But that alliance was very short-lived.
Mm-hmm.
In 1927, Chiang Kai-shek, who had taken over the KMT after Sun Yat-sen died, he orchestrated this bloody purge of communists within the party.
Oh, wow.
Shattered the alliance completely.
That's a major turning point. So now you have this full-blown conflict. How did the communists even survive this and then eventually rise to power?
Well, there are a few reasons.
Okay.
The KMT, even with some early successes, they struggled with corruption. They didn't really address the poverty among the peasants.
Yeah.
And they faced a lot of criticism for how they handled the Japanese invasion.
Okay, so those shortcomings gave the CCP an opening.
Exactly. They gained support among the rural population.
Okay.
And then, of course, you have the legendary Long March.
The Long March. You can't talk about this period without mentioning it. 6,000 miles, incredible hardships, all to establish a new base in Yan'an.
Yeah.
It sounds almost mythical.
It does.
What impact did this incredible feat have on the CCP?
Well, even if the scale and hardship have been embellished over time, it became a symbol of their resilience, their determination.
Okay.
It solidified Mao Zedong's leadership.
Yeah.
He became almost a mythical figure to his followers.
Wow.
And it was a cornerstone of their propaganda, showing their commitment even when facing incredible adversity.
So the Long March ends, and Mao Zedong is firmly in charge.
Right.
The CCP, even after facing all these obstacles, is more unified than ever. This feels like we're on the verge of this massive power shift. What happens next?
Well, this sets the stage for the final clash between the KMT and the CCP.
Okay.
It ends with a communist victory in 1949 and the birth of the People's Republic of China.
Yeah.
But that victory was just the beginning. Mao inherited a nation devastated by war.
Right.
He had to rebuild it, reshape Chinese society, all according to his vision.
Okay, so we left off with Mao, standing victorious, People's Republic of China declared. But like you said, victory is just the start of a whole new set of problems, right?
Oh, absolutely.
What did Mao's China even look like in those early years?
Well, imagine a nation rebuilding after decades of conflict. Mao had huge ambitions, wanted to transform China from an agrarian society to, an industrial powerhouse.
Okay, yeah.
He launches a series of initiatives, like land redistribution, 5-year plans focused on heavy industry, even a period of what seemed like open dialogue called the 100 Flowers campaign.
Okay, let's break that down a bit. 5-year plans sounds pretty intense.
Oh, they were. They were inspired by the Soviet model.
Okay.
These plans set ambitious targets for economic growth. The focus was on rapid industrialization and collectivized agriculture.
Okay.
So millions of peasants were moved onto these communes, right?
Right.
These vast collective farms where they worked and lived together.
Wow.
A radical shift from, traditional farming.
That's a huge change. What about the 100 Flowers campaign?
Yeah.
That sounds surprisingly liberal, I guess, for a communist regime.
It did, didn't it?
Yeah.
Mao actually encouraged intellectuals and citizens to speak their minds, to criticize the government. But this openness, it didn't last long.
Yeah, figures.
When the criticism got too sharp, too real, Mao shut it down, silenced dissent, purged those who'd spoken out against him.
Classic bait and switch. So much for open dialogue.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though. You see this pattern, right? These grand visions, and then they lead to some pretty harsh realities.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what happened with the Great Leap Forward? We touched on it a little bit earlier, but I'm definitely want to dig into this more.
Okay.
This ambitious and ultimately disastrous period.
Yeah, you're right to connect those dots.
Oh.
The Great Leap Forward started in 1958. It was Mao's attempt to just rapidly accelerate China's development. He wanted a utopian society, communal living, industrial output skyrocketing. They had these backyard steel furnaces popping up everywhere, trying to outproduce Britain's steel production.
Really?
It's incredibly ambitious, even, inspiring on the surface, but the reality was very different.
Yeah, I can imagine. What went wrong?
Well, for one thing, those backyard furnaces, they produced mostly useless metal.
Oh, okay.
The focus on steel production, it pulled resources away from agriculture.
Yeah.
And the forced collectivization messed up traditional farming practices.
Right.
The result was a devastating famine across the country.
This is where those recently declassified archives come in, right?
Yes, exactly. They reveal the true scale of suffering during the Great Leap Forward.
Wow.
Historian Frank Decatur, using these archives, he estimates tens of millions died from starvation and persecution.
That's a horrific number.
It is. It's the human cost of Mao's grand vision.
It's hard to even grasp the scale of that tragedy. And it seems like the Great Leap Forward wasn't the only period marked by this kind of, upheaval and suffering.
Yeah.
What about the Cultural Revolution?
Yeah.
What made Mao unleash this wave of, social and political turmoil?
Well, the Cultural Revolution, it lasted from 1966 to 1976.
Okay.
And it was driven by Mao's fear that he was losing his grip on power.
Okay.
He wanted to purge the party, get rid of anyone he saw as a threat. He mobilized young people, forming these groups called the Red Guards, to root out these counter-revolutionaries and capitalist roaders.
Wow.
It was a period of just intense ideological zealotry. Anyone who was seen as disloyal to Mao, they were publicly humiliated, imprisoned, even killed.
It's hard to believe that something so chaotic and destructive could go on for a decade.
It's a dark period.
Yeah. What was the lasting impact, though? I mean, how did the Cultural Revolution shape Chinese society going forward?
Well, it left deep scars, definitely.
Okay.
Widespread persecution, destruction of cultural artifacts, education disrupted.
Yeah.
It created this climate of fear and distrust, and that lingered for years.
So even after Mao died in 76,
Yeah.
the trauma of the Cultural Revolution, it continued to have an effect.
It did on Chinese society and politics.
Wow. So we end this chapter of China's story with Mao Zedong gone, this leader who, despite his early wins in establishing the People's Republic, he leaves behind a legacy that's, filled with suffering and political turmoil. What happens next?
Okay.
Did the CCP just keep going with this hardline approach?
Not exactly. Mao's death triggered a power struggle within the party.
Okay.
You had different factions all competing for control. But one figure emerges from this chaos, Deng Xiaoping.
Okay.
He was a pragmatist,
Okay.
a Long March veteran who'd also been purged during the Cultural Revolution.
Yeah.
He understood that China needed a new path, had to move away from that ideological rigidity towards more pragmatic economic development.
So this is where things take a big turn.
Absolutely. Deng Xiaoping, even though he was a communist leader, he knew that clinging to Mao's ideology would hold China back.
Okay.
He started these bold reforms, and it ushered in an era called reform and opening up.
Reform and opening up. What did these reforms look like? Did
Yeah.
he just dismantle the whole communist system?
No, not entirely. Deng was committed to the CCP's control, but he introduced these market-oriented policies
Okay.
that would radically change China's direction. He opened up the country to foreign investment, encouraged a private enterprise, and slowly started to dismantle the centrally planned economy.
So kind of a hybrid system then?
Yeah, you could see that.
Sounds like a tricky balancing act.
It was. Deng's approach, they often called it socialism with Chinese characteristics.
Interesting.
The idea was to use the market to boost China's economy, but still maintain the CCP's political control.
Okay, so this is a huge turning point, right? We've gone from those tumultuous years under Mao
Yeah.
to this new period of reform and economic liberalization under Deng Xiaoping.
Right.
Sounds like things are improving for China, at least economically. But did this prosperity come with a price tag? Did everyone benefit equally?
That's a good question.
And what about political freedom?
All excellent points. And those questions lead us to another pivotal moment in 20th century China.
Okay.
The Tiananmen Square protests of 1989.
Okay.
Dive into that and its lasting impact in the final part of our deep dive.
So we've gone through revolution, war, this radical transformation, and now we're right there on the edge of the 21st century. Deng Xiaoping's reforms have ushered in this new era for China. But you mentioned this economic boom. It might have come with a price. So where does Tiananmen Square fit into all this?
Tiananmen Square in 1989, it's a stark reminder that economic progress and political freedom, they don't always go hand in hand.
Yeah.
As China opened up economically, people also started to want more, a greater say in politics.
Yeah.
More transparency.
So what sparked the protests then?
Well, the students, they were really leading the charge,
Okay.
demanding democratic reforms, an end to corruption, greater freedom of speech.
Right, and this is all happening, like you said, against this global backdrop of change.
Exactly. The Berlin Wall coming down, the collapse of the Soviet Union. I mean, these events, they gave people hope for similar transformations in China.
It must have been an incredibly tense time. How did Deng Xiaoping react to all of this?
Well, Deng, despite being pragmatic about economics, he was still a committed communist.
Okay, yeah.
He saw these protests as a direct challenge to the party's authority. He was afraid of losing control.
So his response was pretty swift and pretty brutal.
It was.
This is the infamous crackdown, right?
Yeah.
The image of that lone man standing in front of the tank, I mean, it's seared into our collective memory.
It is. June 4th, 1989, the military, they stormed Tiananmen Square, firing on unarmed protesters. The world just watched in horror as this peaceful demonstration was met with violent suppression. And even today, the exact number of casualties is still a secret.
It's a dark chapter in China's story. It really highlights those limits of reform under Deng's leadership. So how did this event shape China going forward? Did it derail the economic progress?
Surprisingly, no. Even with international condemnation, sanctions, the economic reforms, they continued, maybe a little more cautiously. Deng, he kind of stepped back from day-to-day leadership, but his successors, Jiang Zemin and then later Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao, they largely stuck to his plan.
Okay.
Prioritize economic growth, but keep tight political control.
So the economic engine kept running, but what about those social imbalances we talked about?
Right.
Did things change at all for the people who weren't benefiting from this rapid growth?
Well, Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao, they took over in 2002, and they were facing a China that was, struggling with the consequences of this rapid development. And they talked about creating this harmonious society, right?
Okay, yeah.
Trying to fix some of the inequalities, especially that gap between urban and rural areas.
But I imagine they still had to keep that tight grip on power, though. How did they manage that tension?
It was a constant balancing act. They started some social welfare programs, invested in rural infrastructure, but they also continued to suppress dissent.
Yeah.
Control the media, censor the internet. They faced new challenges like environmental damage, labor unrest, and those calls for more transparency and accountability just kept getting louder.
And through all this, China's still rising on the world stage. They even hosted the 2008 Olympics. It's a remarkable transformation, but like you've been saying, it's not a simple story.
Exactly. China entered the 21st century as this economic superpower. But that question of political reform, still there, unresolved. And that brings us to today, with Xi Jinping in charge. He's consolidated power in a way that we haven't seen since Mao. He's pushing a much more assertive and nationalistic agenda.
So where does that leave China today? What could the future look like?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
China's journey through the 20th century, it shows how resilient and adaptable they are.
Yeah.
But it also reveals this tension, this constant tension between economic progress and political freedom, between national ambition and the hopes of its people.
It's been quite a deep dive. We've seen empires rise and fall, revolutions with their triumphs and the tragedies, and just that enduring human spirit that shapes China's destiny.
And it's not over yet.
Yeah.
China's future, its role on the world stage, and its internal challenges, they're all going to keep shaping the 21st century.
Definitely.
Understanding its past, all the complexities, the contradictions, it helps us make sense of the uncertainty that lies ahead.
Well, thank you so much for taking us on this incredible journey. I think it's safe to say China's story is one that deserves our attention, our curiosity, and our willingness to really grapple with its complexity.
Absolutely.
It's a story that's still unfolding and hopefully in enlightening ways.